I'm John Dennis. I'm running against Nancy Pelosi.
We have the most beautiful state and one of the most beautiful places in the world, and people are leaving.
I'm gonna catch you when all the cameras aren't around, and I'm gonna you up. I'm tired.
He's the chairman of the San Francisco GOP, and he's running against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Step back, everyone.
Oh, look at us. All right. Welcome to the John Dennis Report. Happy to have you here this March 8th, 2021. It's funny, when I used to think of 2021 when I was a kid, I used to think of all of the things that would be around. Everyone points to, the flying cars, the whole Jetsons thing. Hold on, let me get this camera right. There we go. All right. Can you see anything outside the flag, Mario?
It's all good.
What's it?
All good.
Okay, good, thanks. So, I used to think, okay, everyone talks about, flying cars and, maybe people living in space on the moon or something like that. Well, it's funny because I always thought that, you would see... I thought about that stuff, of course. But I also thought, certain social ills would be gone. Like, for example, I couldn't imagine that anyone would, harm a child. I just thought, child abuse, child pedophilia would be relics of the past. I mean, who would, because information's spreading so quickly, and you would think that people would be on the lookout for it. People who were, had this affliction, would get help. I mean, I just didn't think it would be around, but yet we still deal with it. I wouldn't think, child abuse in the forms of, violence, kids being hit by their parents. I would think that would have thought that would be over, but it's, it's still out there. I would have thought that, politicians, the way they lie, would be, done as well. But I gotta tell you, I think in some ways all three of those things are maybe worse now than they were when I grew up as a kid. Because what's happened is, let's take the first two are just unconscionable. I can't even imagine, abusing a kid, animal abuse. I can't imagine this. This is like, this day and age where we have this, but it still goes on. But the lying politician thing is also really flummoxing because you would think that with all of the cameras out there and the fact that video sits on the internet and you can rewind people's words and play them back to them, that they would stop. But what's weird is what instead where we are is we're in this place where people lie, people say things that are not true, they say things that they think are going to happen and they don't, and then they just pretend they never happen, and then we have a media which used to have a responsibility. Andy Rooney, I remember when Sacha Baron Cohen went to see him as Ali G, Andy Rooney, lectured him, gave him the whole thing. Without a free media, a democracy cannot function, something along those lines, which is, I suppose, the truth. But now we don't have that media. You don't have the media. The media only questions one side of the aisle. So if you're on the other side of the aisle, you can literally get away with just about anything until you're not politically useful anymore. Which sort of reminds me of what's happening with Andrew Cuomo, because people knew that Cuomo was doing all this stuff for a long time. So anyway, it's just interesting to me, and it started me to think about where this is going. Like where are we going? I thought when the internet came around that we were going to have a that I forget, there's a corollary to it, but there's a thing called Gresham's law, which says that bad money drives good money out of existence. But that's when government forces it. But the truth is the corollary is true. It means good money drives bad money out of existence. Because why would you take bad money, money backed by nothing, when there's good money available? Same thing I thought would be true in terms of ideas. Why would you adopt a bad idea when a good idea you've been exposed to the good idea? But one of the things that I didn't consider naively, and I'm thinking like when I was like 20, 25 years ago when the internet was, just sort of coming about, I was like, whoa, this is going to be great. We're going to have all these bad ideas, all the collectivist and leftist ideas driven out of circulation because they're just completely futile and useless and they don't work. Forget about the morality of why leftist ideas don't work. The morality being that the government has to coerce you into doing things. But I was just thinking in terms of the practicality of it. Why adopt ideas that you just know are not going to work? But what I didn't consider back then, and what we've come to learn is that social media has come along, and instead of being a fan belt or a catalyst for the distribution of good ideas, leading to the adoption of good ideas. What it's created bubbles. People can live in their own bubbles, in their own echo chambers, and just get reinforced on all the bad ideas and pretend that they don't exist. And that's very, very disconcerting. It's made me feel really negative. I'll confess my most negative thoughts about this. That I actually had this conversation with James O'Keefe from Project Veritas that, in the book 1984, the cameras were almost exclusively focused on the people. They were planted in apartments and everywhere. And the government controlled them. And there was a constant spy network focused on you. But what they didn't contemplate was that the government would also have the cameras focused on them. And when we were talking to James about that, we were talking about this at dinner before his presentation. And then sure enough, that exact thought was in his slideshow, and he talks about that quite frequently. So that's a good thing. But what I'm more concerned about is just the historical direction of the country. Few powerful, say, empires, regimes, turn it around after they've started their decline. They don't start declining and then all of a sudden realize, oh, we're going the wrong direction, and then they start going back up and they reach their plateau. They tend to decline and just keep going and going and going. And I just was hopeful, and the sales guy in me, was thinking, well, let's hope and push the idea that we can be unique, that we've got our country rooted with its roots in individual liberty, that we're going to reclaim that, understand it, and then do the one thing that we haven't seen in history, which is turn around, a country, a regime, and, bring it back, restore its glory. I get negative about that. That's sort of me, me being hopeful, right? So fast forward to today, and we've got this situation where the American economy is like $20 trillion. The Chinese economy is $14 trillion and growing fast, really fast, and will overtake us at some point just because they have more people. Our GDP per capita is $65,000. The GDP per capita in China is around $10,000, but they have 4 times as many people. And I think what you're seeing lots of businesses and big corporations. They really want access to those Chinese markets, but China, while it's it's become more liberal economically, is still pretty hardcore control over the social aspects and the political aspects of their lives. So, I look at that and I think, you can see the influence already. You hear about the Confucius Institute, which are these clubs and institutions set up in universities, and they're basically using them as propaganda and recruiting apparatuses to see who the future leaders are and, influence them ideologically and maybe even recruit them to be spies and against the United States. The one thing that Donald Trump did was he exposed all that. So how does this tie into too many cameras, too many guns? Well, you've got an emerging power that is going to overtake the U.S. We've already seen how China has corrupted the United States. We also see that regimes that go into decline rarely turn it around. So what's going to prevent us with all these forces, suppressing the United States? We shipped our manufacturing base over to China, so we're not like we're really living on borrowed time as an economic power. And so what's going to turn it around? How do we find salvation? How do we protect ourselves and not just become a satrap of China as a nation and then individually, abused and kicked around by the bullies and cretins in our own federal government who wouldn't think twice about taking away your liberties and anything else you've got. And I think the one thing, now this is the hope that makes me think that we're not going to completely drift into some sort of dystopia, authoritarian dystopia, is that frankly right now we have too many cameras, and frankly we got too many guns. And when you have people who are who see these things, sorry, got a text. When you have people who see things like get captured on camera, that are abuses to individual liberty, now those ideas, unless they get censored, and it's getting harder to do that, they because you have VPNs and all sorts of things, those ideas tend to get out and about. When you see when people see these kinds of abuses happening and the reporting is happening in real time, it's going to be really difficult to hide these abuses as they happen. And sooner or later, somebody's going to stand up to it and push back on it. I mean, one of the things that Americans, particularly Second Amendment defenders, gun owners, refuse to give up are their guns. And I'm not calling for this. I want to word this really carefully. I'm not suggesting that anybody go this route. I'm just sort of, going to, envisioning where this is all going and where we end up. And again, and I constantly got to overemphasize this. I'm a practitioner of the non-aggression principle. I don't want anybody initiating force against anybody else. I don't want anybody using anything, using weapons against anybody else. But I will say that it's happened in history, and you have to consider, is this a possibility? And I think, like I said, the one thing that someone mentioned about the incident on January 6th was that for the first time, maybe in American history, I'm thinking of the Whiskey Rebellion. I'm trying to think if it's happened on a large scale. There have been big protests in Washington, D.C., but has anybody ever really gone into gone into the buildings? No, I don't think so. And so, we have we're kind of doing this little ballet right now that's getting closer, this mime, where we're pushing back on each other. And then if somebody breaks the field and touches the other person, we could have some trouble. But as long as the guns sit out there, I think that keeps politicians in check. That's why you got to be really careful about never letting go of the guns. You have to hold on to them. And I think that actually, even for the people who don't like guns, they ought to sit back and think about that it keeps the bad actors in government, and there are probably too many to count, from going overboard. And listen, it's power is, as they say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and nothing could be truer. And we need to make sure that nobody ever has absolute power. You're going to see abuses. Power is out there. Government has power. You're going to definitely see abuses. I mean, I think, one of the things that we have to watch here really carefully is when you think about it, the government, if you can you put this thing up about outsourcing the First Amendment censorship? The government explicitly in the First Amendment, can't censor speech, but elements in the government can and have, not that they're allowed to, but they have conspired with entities to get a narrative out. They used to do that with newspapers, they did it with TV, and now they do it through social media. You going to put that up?
Yeah, I'm getting it.
Okay. And so this is actually an article. I just posted the article just to give it a little bit of background. I gave it to you as a screenshot. Yeah. Next one. There you go.
Yep.
There you go. Thanks.
You're doing right.
Thank you. So, yeah, so I mean, this is sort of thing where, the sort of thing that we've been talking about. This article was from 2 years ago, but it keeps coming up, and it actually happened. You saw, the Democrats, put that back up. The Democrats, were telling Silicon Valley to, which accounts to take down, which ones to throttle, which ones to give warnings to. They specifically, worked with Amazon, and they specifically worked with Amazon to take Parler down, a competitor of Twitter. So in return from that, quid pro quo, Twitter turns around and does what the Democrats say. This is where we're at right now. This is a serious situation. They're outsourcing censorship. And listen, I pulled up the Fox News article. Put outsourcing censorship into your browser. Lots of people have written about this. It's a really scary thing, and it just happened. And it doesn't feel like the Department of Justice is looking into doing anything about it. News media is not calling them out. So it's a really tricky thing, but I just think that the people won't put up with it ultimately, not while they're capable of. And again, I don't wish this to happen, but I think that this is just a practical truth. And the only thing that makes me concerned is the frog in the pot of water, right? People have heard this analogy before. The frog is in the pot of water, and it doesn't jump out of the pot even though the heat's being turned up because it's going up gradually, and then by the time it wants to jump out, it's already boiling and it's gone. So that's the thing to be careful about. That's why we have to be really vigilant about, fighting for those Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights, and those specific enumerated protections afforded by the Bill of Rights. It's crazy. I'm like a big gun guy. I don't shoot a ton. I've got a couple of guns, but I don't shoot a ton. But I'm fiercely, will support the Second Amendment. I fiercely support the First Amendment. When a lot of Republicans were ignoring it, a lot of Republicans were supporting the Patriot Act, and I pushed back. I begged lots of Republican groups. Fortunately, ultimately, they didn't have to make a big, declaration. The Democrats just handed that issue over to us. So now we are the defenders of the First Amendment, and we have to be vigilant about it. We have to be vigorously vigilant about it because it is just a critical way for us to continue to live in peace and to not let the government overrun our lives. And what I'm to tie this all up, the big concern is that as China becomes more powerful, and it infiltrates, which it's already shown it's willing to do, as it infiltrates our government and corrupts our government to do its bidding. By the way, you've seen it also just on the corporate level. I mean, look at idiots like LeBron James. who, says, I've got a very educated mind, but, refuses to say one thing about China. In fact, defended China for its arrests and crackdown on civil liberties in Hong Kong. You can see it's already happening. So we have to be, we have to really be vigilant, because if you put, an authoritarian regime and give it control over the essential mechanisms that allow life to happen, banking and communication and, the ability to, to acquire, the provisions that you need for life, the things, the necessities for life. If you do that, then you can be completely intimidated by and governed and controlled by a foreign entity. We've got to really, see that as the main the functional problem in the United States right now. And so as a result, it's important to make sure that we protect our Bill of Rights and defend it, like I said, vigorously, because authoritarians, whether they're of the domestic or the foreign type, they don't like that Bill of Rights. And the first thing they'll do is they'll start abridging the rights protected in them as soon as they can. So anyway, so there's that. So that brings me to my second topic, which is Trump 2.0. So I think right now, my guess is, I think I'm seeing everything that you're seeing. I think, Trump is thinking about whether or not he wants to run, or can he be more effective outside. And I can tell you, the thing about Trump, all the bombast and the sort of clear shortcomings as personality, in other words, like the sort of the vaingloriousness of his personality, belie the fact that he's actually a very smart strategy guy. He does, tactics. I think people see that he does those well, but strategically, he's so smart. I always thought it was funny that, and strategically, frankly, brilliant, that he thought about buying Greenland. And of course, everyone gave him a hard time about it. Greenland wasn't open for business, but that wasn't the point. The point is that he was thinking outside of the box of something really interesting, and that little brainstorm ought to give you an idea of how he thinks about moving forward. So one thing that we know, and that makes me inclined to believe that he's actually going to run, is that he fights for vengeance. He really wants to go after people who have hurt him. There are interviews that have surfaced recently going back to like the 90s, early 90s, or mid 90s, where people who turned him away or were kind of like really, trying to hurt him when he was down and when he was filing, bankruptcies for different entities, where he said he made it his vow. Oh, who did I hear this with? Oh, Branson. There was an interview with Richard Branson where he was recounting a lunch that he had with Trump just as he was emerging from bankruptcy, and how the majority of that time and that meeting was spent with Trump, listing the people who screwed him over and how he was going to get him back. And it was completely antithetical, apparently, to the way Branson does things. But that'll go to give you an indication of whether or not Trump is likely to run again. If he sees that he can get back at his enemies by running again and winning, then he's going to do it. You can rest assured that that's exactly what he's going to do. So I think that, and they just have a tweet that's sitting out there, if Trump does run again, two things. One, I was having a good Scott Pressler stayed with me this weekend, and we were chatting about this. And I think one of the big things that Trump has this thing where he wants to hear both sides and hear opposing points of view and then come up with a decision. I think what Trump needs, if he does go back, is he needs first of all people who are fiercely loyal to him, the smartest, most capable people who have shown that they can succeed based on their past achievements, and the most loyal to him, and that is it. Get the one one point of view if that's all you've got, because he was not served well by having John Bolton in the administration. He was not served well by having a number of these other people in the administration who went after him. I think Kelly and some of these other guys. So he needs people who are incredibly loyal. And then what he should do is just adopt a fiercely libertarian agenda, a liberty agenda, where he audits the Fed. If he wants to get back at those people and drive them nuts, first thing is actually get super loyal people inside. Defang the deep state, go after the intelligence apparatus, get rid of all those people, all those operatives in there. Get people who know what they're doing, who are loyal to Trump and loyal to the country, and go in and replace them and take out all the junk that they're doing, weaken the deep state, then go after audit the Fed, then bring home the troops, then start dramatically cutting spending on the federal level, and then start paying back federal debt. If he does those things, he will do more damage to them than they couldn't even imagine. If he made them nuts, with his agenda in the first administration, Trump 2.0 with the liberty style, liberty flair, will absolutely make them mental cases. They'll have to all be taken away in straitjackets, because what he'd be doing is completely cutting off all the power. And here's the thing. It's not like that power that these folks have are protecting us from external threats. The power that these people have is actually enhancing and creating a mechanism to be leveraged by foreign threats like China. So, at this stage of the game, we should probably just reduce the size of that power. Steve Bannon used to refer to it as, taking out the administrative state. He was right about that. I mean, that was the thing that when I talked to other people who were running for president in the past, what can you actually do if you become president? Because the truth is that the bureaucratic state, the administrative state, is so powerful that they won't let you do even the things that you're supposed to be able to do. Like, for example, when Trump was going to take down troops from Afghanistan, or return troops, even from the final troops from Iraq, they threw hissy fits. They said, no way, you can't do this. President's supposed to be in charge of foreign policy, not the generals. But in any event, that's that. So I think Trump ought to go for the heavy-duty libertarian, the pro-liberty agenda, and chase them down. Chase down those points, and absolutely, defang Washington D.C. And what you'll find, by the way, if you're an American, and most people around the world, you'll find your lives will improve immensely, by having a much smaller, much more limited Washington, D.C. D.C. that doesn't take 25% of GDP for itself. Think about that. Big number, by the way. 6 million people total work for the federal government, but they control 25% of the economy. All right, let me move on to the next and final topic, and this one is sort of off politics, but it's kind of related. It's more cultural, and it's related to the Harry and Meghan interview. And it's so funny because my wife wanted nothing to do with it last night. She didn't want to watch it, and I found myself oddly like, okay, I'll watch this. I guess I'll watch it. And then when it was on, I was sitting there like this, like, I mean, it was, as a guy who as I've told many of you before, I train lots of salespeople. I studied a lot of persuasion, which is one of the reasons why I like Scott Adams, by the way. But I'm sitting there watching this and going, oh my gosh, whoa. I mean, this is wild. Let me just make a couple of points about this. America's new weapon, its new most feared weapon, is if we exported attractive social justice warriors. What we should do is, I've just tweeted about this a little while ago, we should get a couple of thousand Meghan Markles, for example, and ship them over to China. China will be on its knees within a decade. Because they will have you mental. They will absolutely have you mental. If you think about what she did last night, and I think Jack Posobiec mentioned this earlier, I thought the same exact thing. In an abusive relationship, your abuser tells you, I'm going to commit suicide unless I get my way, unless I get what I want. and uses that threat to create distance between the people who are in your family, and that person, to gain control. And if you watch the body language in that interview last night, it was pretty scary. You want to talk about someone who's trapped? Prince Harry said that he was trapped when he was at home and he didn't realize it. He doesn't realize now. He is trapped by her. He turned away his whole family, separated them, and all so that he could do her bidding, what she wanted to be done. And, you'll notice that when he was there, she kept holding his hand, like reassuring him. I mean, that's like an old, persuasion trick, holding the hand and make sure I'm here. I'm right here. Don't stray. Don't go away from the party line. And what she's effectively done, this woman who is, a social justice warrior of some level, and who's committed to, pushing narratives that are useful in playing on people's decency. Like, for example, bringing up race. I mean, she uses all these little techniques. She used this as the suicide, or do what I want, or I'm going to commit suicide. She brought up the racial element, but won't identify who the party was who said that. Because, by the way, the party who brought that up could have been talking about, if the kid, if somebody has big ears, oh, I wonder whose ears they're going to get. You know what I mean? I mean, you don't know the context of that conversation if it even ever happened. She could be Megan Smollett for all we know, making up the thing out of whole cloth, or filtering. When Harry brought the conversation back to her, maybe she put her own spin, and then in their minds, she put her spin on that conversation, and now that is firmly rooted in their reality. So the whole conversation was really disconcerting. It was scary to see for this poor guy, and also just realize that this American infection. Maybe actually I shouldn't say that that it's an American problem. This line of thinking probably came from other places. Maybe it might be rooted in Europe, but the American version of it was exported in the form of Meghan Markle to the United Kingdom, and they are suffering the consequences. And she's really been destructive to the institution of the monarchy, whether you like a monarchy or not. And it just made me think, well, if China's our biggest enemy, they're participating and pushing an information war on us. Maybe we should push back with them with a social justice war and see how they can withstand that. But that suicide and separation thing is a textbook abusive relationship. It's one step away from getting physical. So we don't know that, but I will say this: she joined the institution voluntarily. Nobody compelled her to do that, and she didn't know the rules apparently, and her son wasn't going to be protected by security. And her response when she was informed of that her son would not get a title because he's like 78th in the line of succession, or her children wouldn't get those titles, and they wouldn't get security, something that had been in place, a prescription that had been in place for over 100 years, of which she did not make herself aware until after she married. What she should have done is said, okay, fine, this is the institution. I married into it. I'm going to protect the institution for the sake of my husband, and we will find other means of security. We will find ways of earning money enough so that we can pay for security, and we understand the position of the institution, and we'll move on. Instead, what she did was she threw a hissy fit, and then used it as an excuse to run away, and leverage her new royalty as a way to get attention in her home country and to make some money. So really destructive, really bad, and we should use this as an example of just how destructive this kind of thinking it can be. We got to deal with it. We got to face it down. We got to leverage their own morality against them on the left until they absolutely cry uncle. Because if not, people like that will come in and destroy all of our institutions that actually work. You know, the ones that actually improve quality of life. So there you go. There's my take on that. I am so sorry that we started late today. We had some technical problems. But I'm grateful for those of you who watched, and I want to ask you to please follow me at Real John Dennis on Twitter, the John Dennis Report on YouTube and on Facebook, and of course, website you can go to John Dennis for Congress. I'm running against Nancy Pelosi. You can support us there, and really appreciate you joining us today. And we will be back tomorrow in the 2:00 hour, hopefully without technical problems. We had an issue with the camera today. Wasn't working in our software, but we've ultimately worked it out. So thanks again for joining us, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.